A Navy SEAL inherited his grandma's mountain cabin. Then his K-9 uncovered a secret the most powerful family in town tried to bury. Fog rolled off the Colorado Ridge as Logan Barrett returned to a place he'd spent his whole life avoiding. The cabin stood frozen in time, untouched yet heavy with a silence that felt wrong. But when his loyal K-9 Ranger scratched at an old wall panel, the truth they uncovered set the entire mountain town on edge. Comment 1 or 0 and tell us where you're watching from. Rain drifted across the desert like a thin gray curtain, soft enough to blur the outlines of Logan Barrett's small rental house, but steady enough to keep the sky heavy and low. The storm had been building since dawn, gathering on the far edge of the Arizona horizon before finally settling over the valley. Inside, the dim light from a single kitchen bulb reflected off the metal sink and the worn wooden table where Logan sat, one hand cupped around a mug of black coffee gone cold. The house was quiet except for the rain tapping the windows and the slow, measured breaths of Ranger, his retired K-9 partner, resting on the floor beside him. Ranger's tan and black fur blended into the shadows near Logan's boots, but his amber eyes never left his handler. Even in retirement, the dog remained vigilant, attuned to every shift in Logan's posture, every break in his breathing. Logan's mornings were usually predictable. Coffee, a long walk with Ranger, maybe a trip to the hardware store if he needed something to keep his hands busy. Routine wasn't comfort, but it was something solid to stand on. Today, though, something felt different. There was a thin knot in his chest, the kind of pressure that often preceded a memory he didn't want to revisit. A sharp knock at the door cut through the quiet. Ranger rose instantly, muscles tensing, tail stiff and low. Logan's shoulders tightened. At this hour, in weather like this, no one knocked without a reason. He stood, steadying himself against the familiar weight that sometimes came with sudden noise. His hand brushed Ranger's head, a silent message, the same one they'd exchanged 1,000 times overseas. Easy. With me. Logan opened the door to find a postal carrier bracing herself against the rain. She held a clipboard sealed under a plastic cover and a single large envelope tucked against her chest. "Mr. Logan Barrett?" she asked. "That's me. I need a signature. Certified delivery." He signed without thinking, the motion automatic, like muscle memory from a simpler life. The carrier hurried back to her truck, boots splashing through shallow puddles. Logan closed the door and stared at the envelope. It was heavy, formal, the kind of weight that carried obligation rather than news. Ranger returned to his place by the table, watching him with steady eyes. Logan tore open the seal slowly. A smaller envelope slid out, embossed with the name Harmon and Fields Law Office, Evergreen Ridge, Colorado. His breath hitched. He hadn't thought of Colorado, or anyone in Evergreen Ridge in years, not since he'd left home at 18. He unfolded the letter. "Dear Mr. Barrett, we regret to inform you of the passing of Ms. Mabel Whitaker." The words blurred for a moment before sharpening again. His grandmother, the woman who had lived tucked away in the mountains of Colorado, too far from the rest of the world for anyone to check on her. The one person in his family who had tried, quietly, imperfectly, to reach out when he was younger, and he had never written back, not once. Logan exhaled, the breath shaky. Mabel Whitaker was gone. The letter continued. "You have been named her sole heir. Please contact our office regarding the transfer of her property." Her property? Logan leaned back in the chair. His grandmother had lived her whole life without $2 spare to rub together. Whatever she left behind couldn't be worth much. Maybe a small cabin, a patch of land too rocky to farm. But the fact that she had left anything to him felt heavier than the storm outside. A dull ache started behind his ribs, the kind that came with memories he'd worked hard to bury, nights on deployment, when nothing but the sound of gunfire kept him awake. The patrol that went wrong. The friend he couldn't save. His father's voice, cold and sharp. All of it pressed forward, uninvited. Ranger stepped closer and rested his broad head on Logan's knee. Logan's hand moved automatically to the dog's fur. Ranger had saved him more times than he could count, sometimes from danger, sometimes from himself. The dog's steady presence anchored him, pulled him back from the edge of thoughts that threatened to swallow everything. "I'm okay," Logan murmured, though his voice was thin. Ranger didn't move. He simply stayed there, breathing slow and warm against Logan's leg, refusing to let him drift too far into the dark spaces of his mind. Outside, thunder rumbled across the desert, low and distant. Logan reread the letter. Evergreen Ridge. His grandmother, an inheritance he never asked for. A past he'd tried hard not to look back at. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar. An invitation, or maybe a responsibility. A pull toward a place he'd abandoned long ago. He folded the letter and set it on the table. The storm outside showed no sign of letting up, and neither did the tension tightening across his chest. But one thing was certain. He couldn't ignore this. Not anymore. Ranger lifted his head, ears perked, as if sensing the decision forming in Logan's mind. "Yeah," Logan whispered. "Looks like we're going to Colorado, buddy." Ranger let out a soft huff of breath, as if to say he already knew. 2 days later, Logan's old Tacoma rolled northbound on Highway 191, the desert giving way to long stretches of open land and distant ridgelines. Ranger sat upright in the passenger seat, alert but calm, his gaze fixed on the rolling horizon ahead. The farther they drove, the more the air changed, cooler, sharper, carrying the faint scent of pine even before the trees appeared. Logan kept both hands on the wheel, his eyes scanning the empty road the way he used to watch perimeters overseas. It wasn't habit anymore. It was instinct. The letter sat folded on the dashboard, held in place by a pair of scratched sunglasses. He had read it enough times to memorize every line, yet it still felt unreal. Mabel Whitaker. Gone. And he was the only one left to handle her affairs. The highway narrowed as the land climbed, drawing them toward the Rockies like a slow, inevitable pull. Snow-dusted peaks loomed in the distance, their jagged edges scraping the clouds. Ranger shifted, ears twitching as the truck bounced over a patch of broken asphalt. "You feel it too," Logan murmured. He wasn't sure what it was. Maybe the sense of returning to a past he'd never fully walked away from, or the uneasy knot tightening with every mile. Maybe it was his grandmother's voice in the back of his mind, faint but persistent, urging him home. He didn't know, he only knew the road felt heavier than it should. Late afternoon brought them to a narrow valley town called Reston Junction, a cluster of aging storefronts and rusted metal roofs that looked like they belonged in another decade. Logan pulled into the single gas station, its sign swaying in the wind with a tired creak. Ranger stood in the truck bed while Logan pumped gas. A few locals lingered near the convenience store entrance, bundled against the cold. Their conversations quieted the moment they saw him. At first, Logan assumed they were curious about Ranger. A retired military K-9 always drew attention. but their eyes didn't leave his face. A thin man in a flannel jacket stepped closer, studying him with a cautious stare. "You passing through?" the man asked. "Heading to Evergreen Ridge," Logan replied, replacing the gas nozzle. The man's expression tightened. Another older guy near the doorway muttered something under his breath. Logan caught only one word: Whitaker. A woman inside the store peeked through the window, her brow knitted with concern, or maybe warning. The man cleared his throat. "Whitakers don't come back to these parts," he said quietly. "Not since the incident." Before Logan could ask, the man stepped back, suddenly unwilling to continue. He motioned toward the cloudy ridgeline in the distance. "Road gets rough from here on out. Watch for early snow." Logan didn't press further. Questions could wait. He paid inside where the cashier barely met his eyes and returned to Ranger, who stood rigid, scanning the parking lot. "Let's go," Logan said softly. They left the town behind, following a winding state road that climbed higher into the mountains. Paved asphalt gave way to gravel, gravel to packed dirt. Dense pines rose on both sides, their branches heavy with the season's first snow. Ranger leaned forward, nose testing the air. The dog's posture shifted from relaxed to razor alert. "You smell something?" Logan asked, easing off the gas. Ranger's quiet rumble was answer enough. The road curved sharply along a ridge. Logan slowed even more. To his right, the land fell away into a deep, shadowed ravine, dotted with fallen logs and glistening rock. Above them, clouds gathered thick and heavy. Minutes later, Logan spotted an old wooden sign half swallowed by vines. Evergreen Ridge, 14 miles. The deeper they went, the more isolated everything felt. Half-collapsed barns leaned toward the earth. Faded trail markers pointed into dark forests. An abandoned mining bridge crossed a stream swollen with meltwater. The truck rattled across it, the boards groaning beneath the tires. Logan kept one hand near Ranger's harness as the dog moved beside him, the way he always did when danger lingered close but unseen. Dusk began settling over the mountains, tinting the world in muted blue. The shadows stretched long, swallowing the road ahead. A solitary crow perched on a stump, watching silently as they passed. A chill crept into the truck cab, not from the temperature, but from the sudden stillness of the forest around them. Ranger's ears snapped forward. Then Logan saw it too. A dark pickup parked on the side of the dirt road, engine idling, lights dimmed. The driver's silhouette was barely visible through the tinted glass. The truck didn't move as Logan passed, didn't wave, didn't acknowledge him at all. But Ranger issued a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the seat. "Easy," Logan whispered, though his own nerves tightened. The black pickup appeared again 5 minutes later, this time coming from a side trail and merging behind them. Logan checked the mirror. The truck kept its distance at first, then slowly closed the gap. Old training kicked in. Logan assessed escape routes, terrain, blind curves. His grip on the wheel tightened. Finally, without warning, the pickup pulled off onto another narrow trail and vanished between the trees. Logan exhaled slowly. He wasn't sure if the truck had been following him, or if he simply didn't want to assume the worst. But Ranger kept staring back at the empty trail long after the truck was gone. By the time they reached the fork leading to Evergreen Ridge, night had begun to swallow the sky. Logan drove on, guided by the faint glow of headlights against the snow-covered trees. Whatever waited for them, in that forgotten mountain town, he could feel it settling in the air, quiet, heavy, and watching. Ranger pressed close and Logan whispered, "Stay sharp, buddy. We're not in Arizona anymore." Evergreen Ridge appeared slowly out of the trees as the dirt road straightened. A handful of warm lights twinkled from distant windows, but most of the town looked dark, the kind of place where everyone turned in early because there wasn't much reason to stay awake. Snow clung to roofs and piled along the roadside. A wooden sign swung in the breeze, its paint peeling but still legible enough to say, "Welcome to Evergreen Ridge. Pop." 6:12. Logan drove through the center without stopping. A diner with a flickering neon open sign stood at one end, across from a courthouse that looked as though it had been built in the 1950s and never updated since. The streets were nearly empty. Only an elderly man sweeping snow off his porch paused to stare as the Tacoma passed. The road leading to Mabel Whitaker's property wound up the eastern ridge, growing steeper with every turn. Tall pines surrounded them, their branches nearly brushing the truck, as if the forest were closing in. Logan glanced at the GPS again, though it hadn't been helpful since losing signal earlier. He relied mostly on the directions mailed with the letter. Eventually, the last sign of the town disappeared behind them. The headlights cut through fog and falling snow, illuminating a narrow path carved along the mountainside. Ranger sniffed the air, ears flicking back and forth. He sat perfectly still, his heightened alert posture, watching the shadows shift between the trees. A final bend brought them to a clearing. There it was. The cabin stood beneath a towering granite cliff, its roof blanketed in snow, its stone chimney rising like a lonely sentinel against the sky. The porch sagged slightly on one side but held together, and a single metal wind chime hung from a beam, turning silently in the cold. Tall pines crowded the edges of the clearing, forming a natural wall. Logan cut the engine. For a moment, the world fell unbelievably quiet. Only the soft patter of snow and Ranger's steady breathing filled the air. "Well," Logan murmured. She wasn't kidding about remote. He stepped out into the cold, pulling his jacket tighter. Ranger jumped down beside him, landing silently despite the snow. The dog sniffed the air, moving ahead in a careful arc around the porch, nose low, tail straight. He checked corners, the path to the outhouse, and the base of the cliff before returning to Logan's side. A full sweep, quick, thorough, practiced. "No threats?" Logan asked. Ranger sat, watching him with serious eyes. Not alarmed, not relaxed. Neutral readiness. The mountain kind. Logan approached the cabin door. A tarnished brass key waited under a smooth river stone, exactly where the letter had said it would be. The lock turned with a slow, hollow click. He pushed the door open. Cold air breathed out from the darkness, carrying with it a faint mixture of pine, old books, and something he couldn't quite name. Something that felt like time. He reached for the flashlight on his belt and stepped inside. Ranger padded in beside him, silent and steady. The interior was dim, but as the beam swept across the room, details emerged. A coat hung neatly on a wooden peg by the door. A cup sat beside the sink. A knitted blanket was folded across the back of a rocking chair. Dust lay thick on every surface, yet nothing appeared disturbed. It looked like his grandmother had stepped out for a few minutes and simply never returned. Logan felt a shift in his chest, an ache he didn't want to acknowledge. He had barely known Mabel, but the small reminders of her presence stirred something complicated. Guilt, maybe. Regret. A sense of loss he hadn't expected. Ranger moved ahead, nose to the floorboards, posture tightening with every step. "What is it?" Logan asked softly. The dog didn't respond. Too focused, tail rigid. He traced a path toward the table, circled twice, then paused near the old fireplace. He let out a faint whine, the kind he used when identifying something unfamiliar but not dangerous. Logan crouched beside him, scanning the room again. The place was still, silent. But something about the silence felt unnatural, too complete, too heavy, like it had been held there for years without escaping. He stood and walked slowly through the main room, feeling Ranger's shadow at his heels. A narrow hallway led to a small kitchen area, then a bedroom at the back. A wooden ladder led to a loft above. Everything inside was well-worn, yet tidy, like Mabel had lived a simple and orderly life. But beneath the order was something else, a hush that made Logan's skin prickle. His PTSD stirred unexpectedly. Not violently, just a low pressure behind his ribs, the kind he'd felt on long night patrols overseas, when the desert air held its breath right before something moved. He focused on Ranger's presence, grounding himself the way therapists had taught him. Ranger nudged his hand, a soft, deliberate touch. "I'm good," Logan whispered, though his voice lacked conviction. He walked to the window beside the kitchen table. The view looked out over the valley, a sea of dark pines and rolling fog. If someone stood in those woods watching, he wouldn't be able to see them through the snow. He didn't like that thought. Ranger didn't either. The dog remained close, head high, staring out into the dusk as if expecting something to emerge from the shadows. Logan took a slow breath. "This is home for now," he said quietly, maybe speaking more to himself than to Ranger. "We'll sort it out. Whatever she left, whatever happened here, we'll figure it out." Ranger's ear twitched, acknowledging the words. Logan walked to the fireplace and brushed a layer of dust from the mantel. A framed photo leaned against the stone. A younger Mabel standing in front of this same cabin, holding a basket of herbs. Beside her was a man Logan didn't recognize, tall and thin, with a kind smile. He reached out to pick up the photo, but before his fingers touched the frame, Ranger stiffened. The dog's body went still, eyes locked on the far corner of the room. Logan followed his gaze. There, beside the old dresser along the bedroom wall, a faint seam in the wood caught the light of his flashlight. A seam he hadn't noticed a moment ago. A seam that didn't belong. A quiet pulse of unease rippled through him. He didn't investigate. Not yet. Not tonight. Instead, he stepped back, turned on his heel, and said softly, "Let's set camp, Ranger. We'll check everything in the morning." But even as he said it, he knew. The house held something, and it had been waiting a long time. Night settled over the ridge like a heavy blanket. The wind pressed against the windows, carrying the low rustling of pine branches that scraped softly along the cabin's weathered boards. Logan built a small fire in the stone fireplace, its orange glow pushing back the shadows that had crept into every corner of the room. Ranger lay near the hearth, his head resting on his paws, but his eyes open, always open. Logan could tell the dog wasn't resting. His ears twitched at every pop of the burning wood, every sigh of the wind. He was listening, evaluating, waiting. Logan unrolled his sleeping bag on the old couch and sat down slowly. The warmth of the fire eased some of the stiffness in his shoulders, but the knot of unease remained. The faint seam he'd spotted near the dresser lingered in the back of his mind like an unfinished sentence. He rubbed his face, trying to settle his thoughts. "We'll check it in the morning," he muttered to himself. "Too tired now." Ranger didn't move, but his ears pricked at the sound of Logan's voice. The fire crackled quietly. Logan leaned back, letting the soft warmth wash over him. He tried to focus on the ordinary things, the smell of burning wood, the familiar creak of the floorboards, the comforting presence of Ranger nearby. But memories crawled in around the edges. Nights in the desert when silence meant danger. Moments before an ambush when the world seemed to hold its breath. He closed his eyes, just for a moment. A sudden sound shattered the quiet. A sharp scratching, quick, urgent, deliberate. Logan bolted upright. Ranger was already on his feet, body rigid, a deep growl vibrating in his chest. The dog moved across the room in seconds, stopping at the old chest of drawers pressed against the far wall. The scratching came again. This time, it was from inside the cabin, inside the wall. Logan grabbed his flashlight, sweeping the beam across the dresser. Ranger pawed at the floor, then at the wood, his nose pressed tight against the seam Logan had noticed earlier. "You've got something," Logan whispered. He approached slowly, the way he used to approach a suspicious object overseas. Measured steps, steady breath, every sense alert. He placed a hand on Ranger's back. The dog's muscles were coiled, ready. Logan crouched and ran his fingertips along the seam. The wood was old, but not warped. A faint draft seeped through the edges. "Hidden panel," he murmured. He pushed gently. Nothing budged. Ranger scratched again, 2 sharp, insistent strokes, then looked at Logan as if to say, "Here. Right here." Logan moved the dresser aside, bracing his legs to slide the heavy furniture with minimal noise. Dust rose in a soft cloud, drifting through the beam of his flashlight. Once the dresser cleared the space, he knelt again and pressed along the panel until his fingers found a loose edge. The wood clicked, soft, subtle. The panel shifted inward. A small, dark cavity revealed itself, no larger than a shoebox, but deep enough to hold something long hidden. The air inside smelled of oiled cloth and age. Logan reached in carefully, his fingertips brushing cold metal. He pulled out a rusted lockbox wrapped in layers of faded, oiled cloth. It was heavier than it looked. Ranger backed up slightly, watching with steady, unblinking attention. Logan set the box on the table. The firelight flickered over its dented surface. The lock was old, but intact. He took a moment before opening it, steadying his breath. "Let's see what you've been hiding, Mabel," he whispered. He unfastened the latch. The lid creaked open. Inside lay a collection of objects carefully arranged, preserved as if someone had known they would matter someday. Black and white photographs, edges curled, a stack of newspaper clippings, several handwritten notes tied with twine, and bundles of old bills thick and faded with age. Logan lifted the top newspaper clipping. The headline struck him like a physical blow. "Relief funds missing. Local woman vanishes." His grandmother's name appeared in the second line. Mabel Whitaker, accused of mishandling money after the 1964 mudslide disaster. Rumors. Disappearance. Investigation pending. Logan stared at the words, jaw tightening. "That's why they looked at me in town," he muttered. Ranger pressed his head against Logan's leg, sensing the shift in his emotions. Logan pulled out the second clipping. Another headline. Another accusation. Another hint that Mabel had fled before she could be questioned. No wonder the Whitaker name made people whisper. He reached for the handwritten notes. The ink had faded, but Mabel's handwriting was strong and decisive. He didn't read them yet. Not now. He needed a clearer mind first. He leaned back in the chair, staring at the lockbox. This wasn't some minor secret. This was a scandal, the kind that carved deep wounds in a small town, and his grandmother had carried the weight of it alone. Ranger let out a soft whine. Logan looked down at him. "You found this," Logan said quietly. "You knew." The dog tilted his head, as if acknowledging the truth without pride. The cabin creaked suddenly, the wind pressing hard against the back wall. Logan scanned the room, heart thudding. Nothing moved except the fire. No footsteps. No shadows shifting where they shouldn't. Still, the unease remained. Something wasn't right. This house had been holding its breath for decades, and Ranger had just broken the seal. Logan closed the lockbox and set it gently on the table. "We're not alone in this, buddy," he whispered. "There's more buried here, and we're going to find it." Ranger settled beside him, but didn't close his eyes. The dog kept watch, and Logan knew that whatever his grandmother had been hiding, the first layer had only just been uncovered. Morning arrived with a thin wash of gray light across the cabin windows. Snow had settled in a fragile crust on the porch, and the air inside felt colder than it had the night before. Logan stirred the embers in the fireplace, coaxing a small flame back to life before grabbing his coat. "Come on, Ranger," he said. "We need supplies and answers." Ranger stretched, shook out his fur, and trotted beside him as they stepped outside. The sky hung low, swollen with more snow to come. Their breath fogged in the air, drifting upward like faint smoke. The drive into Evergreen Ridge took them along the same winding road they'd traveled the night before. But in daylight, everything felt sharper, more exposed. The trees seemed taller, the ravine deeper, the silence heavier. Ranger kept his head out the window, nose working, cataloging every new scent. Logan parked near the town's small main square. The diner's neon sign buzzed weakly in the frosty air. A hardware store stood across the street next to a post office with an American flag snapping in the wind. The few locals out and about paused as Logan stepped onto the sidewalk. Their gazes lingered not on Ranger, who trotted obediently at his side, but on Logan himself, on his face, his build, the quiet intensity in his eyes. Some looked startled, others whispered. Logan straightened his shoulders. He had walked into villages overseas where people whispered too, but this felt different. It felt personal. The diner's bell jingled softly when Logan pushed the door open. Warmth rolled out, warmth and the smell of bacon, coffee, and old wood. A handful of patrons sat at booths and tables, murmuring over breakfast plates. The moment Logan stepped inside, the room fell into a hush. He walked to the counter, Ranger settling at his feet, posture crisp and attentive. The waitress, a woman in her 60s with silver hair tied back in a bun, approached him with a polite but guarded smile. "What can I get you, hun?" "Coffee to start," Logan said. "And maybe some information." She paused halfway through pouring. "Information? I'm here about Mabel Whitaker. She was my grandmother." The mug froze in her hand. 3 men in a booth near the window shifted uneasily. A younger woman at a corner table looked down, pretending she wasn't listening. The waitress finally set the coffee down, her eyes softening just a touch. "Your grandmother." She kept to herself. "Folks around here talked more than they should have." "What did they say?" Logan asked. Before she could answer, an older woman approached slowly from the end of the counter. Her hair was white and braided over one shoulder, her sweater thick and hand-knit. "You must be Logan," she said gently. "I'm Edith Collins. I knew Mabel." Logan nodded. I was hoping someone here did. Edith glanced around before lowering her voice. Your grandma wasn't the villain people made her out to be. Be careful who you trust. Logan's brow tightened. Why? Because not everyone in this town wants the past dug up. She touched his arm lightly, her expression grave. Some folks built their lives on what happened to your grandmother. Ranger shifted, ears snapping toward the front windows. Logan turned and saw a dark pickup parked across the street, the same one from the night before. Its engine idled, exhaust curling into the cold air. The windows were tinted so deeply he couldn't see the driver. It stayed there, unmoving. Edith followed his gaze, her lips pressed tightly together. You should finish your coffee and go. There are people who won't take kindly to you being here. Logan sipped the hot bitterness of the drink, his pulse steady but alert. Ranger's growl rumbled low, vibrating against Logan's boots. The dog had not looked away from the truck. Edith, Logan asked quietly, what really happened to my grandmother? Her eyes softened, filled with a sorrow he didn't understand yet. Mabel was a good woman caught in something she couldn't fight alone. But whatever she hid in that house of hers, Edith shook her head. If you found anything, keep it close. The diner fell silent again. The wind rattled the windows. Logan paid the bill and stepped outside with Ranger. The cold slapped his face, sharp enough to clear his thoughts. The dark pickup still idled at the curb. Logan walked toward his truck, Ranger glued to his side. The driver's window lowered just an inch, just enough for Logan to sense eyes behind the glass. Then, without warning, the pickup rolled forward, tires crunching over snow, and drove off toward the northern trail without so much as a glance. Ranger growled deep in his chest until the truck vanished behind a wall of trees. Logan scanned the tree line. Nothing moved. But the whole town felt like it was staring, listening for his next move. He opened his truck door. We're not welcome, he murmured. Ranger climbed in first, still watching the road. Logan looked back toward the diner. Edith stood at the door, her hand pressed to the glass as though she had something more to say. But she didn't step outside. Instead, she gave him a small, knowing nod. A warning. A plea. Or maybe both. Logan started the engine. We're getting close to something, Ranger, he said quietly as they pulled away from Evergreen Ridge. And they know it. Ranger settled into his seat, gaze locked forward. The town shrank in the rearview mirror, but the feeling of eyes watching followed them all the way back into the woods. The tension hadn't lifted. It had only grown deeper, sharper, heavier. Logan exhaled slowly. The mountain was holding its secrets tight. And now he understood. People were willing to do the same. By the time Logan and Ranger reached the cabin, the last traces of daylight had vanished behind the ridge. A thin layer of fresh snow covered the clearing, glowing faintly under the pale moon filtering through the clouds. The flashlight beams swept across the trees as Logan stepped out of the truck, breath fogging in the cold mountain air. Ranger jumped down beside him, rigid, ears pricked forward. The dog had already picked up something, an unfamiliar scent or disturbance. Logan followed Ranger's gaze toward the cabin door. It was open. Just slightly, but definitely open. Logan froze, his pulse tightening. He knew he had locked it. A faint memory rose. The first rule on patrol. If something is off, assume danger until proven otherwise. Stay close, he whispered. Ranger moved low and silent, the same way he used to during night operations. Logan approached from the side, avoiding the direct line of the doorway, flashlight held low and angled. The snow near the entryway was disturbed. 2 sets of footprints, one fresh, one fading. Someone had been here, not long ago. Logan steadied his breathing. The pressure behind his ribs, the early thrum of a flashback, began creeping in. He closed his eyes for half a second, grounding himself the way he'd practiced. Ranger nudged the back of his knee, snapping him back to the present. They slipped inside. The air in the cabin felt colder than the outside, as if the warmth had been sucked out by whoever forced their way in. The fire from the morning was dead. The ashes had been disturbed. Ranger moved ahead, nose close to the floor, following an invisible trail. Logan swept the flashlight across the room, chaos. Papers scattered across the floor. Drawers pulled open. The lockbox overturned, its lid hanging open. He crouched beside it. Nothing inside appeared stolen, but everything had been examined. Whoever broke in wasn't after money. They were searching for something specific. Ranger moved toward the table, posture tightening again. He stopped beside a piece of paper left in the center, placed there deliberately. Logan picked it up. The handwriting was jagged, rushed, written with a heavy hand. Stop digging. Leave now. Last warning. B. His chest tightened, not with fear, but with something sharper, colder. Anger flickered at the edges of his calm. The old life, the missions, the threats, the games of intimidation rose in his memory. He didn't try to suppress it this time. Ranger let out a low growl deep in his throat. Logan stood again, scanning the room, replaying every detail. Whoever broke in had known exactly where to look. Someone with knowledge of the cabin. Someone with a stake in what Mabel hid. And someone who believed they could frighten him off. They didn't know him well. He moved through the cabin, checking corners and entry points. The back window had been pried open with something thin but strong. A flat tool, maybe. The wood frame bore fresh scratches. Snow beneath the window had been disturbed too, footprints leading back toward the woods. Ranger followed the prints to the door, barking once, sharp and angry. Logan placed a hand on the dog's back. Easy. They're gone. But his own pulse was still high. He forced himself to inhale slowly, drawing in air until the tremor behind his ribs quieted. The last thing he needed was a flashback hitting him blind. He walked back to the table, staring at the note. B. Benjamin Crow? Or someone working for him? He folded the note and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Ranger suddenly lifted his head, ears locked toward the woods. A faint sound drifted through the trees, far off but unmistakable. The rumble of an engine starting. A vehicle pulling away. Someone had waited long enough to make sure Logan saw the message. "You hear that?" Logan whispered. Ranger growled quietly, then looked back at Logan as if asking what came next. Logan moved toward the window, peering out at the dark stretch of forest. Snowflakes drifted lazily in the moonlight, masking everything beyond a few yards. Whoever had been here knew the terrain well, knew how to move through the shadows. He stepped back, rubbing a thumb across the edge of the note. "This wasn't random," he said softly. "They wanted us to know they were here." Ranger exhaled sharply, restless. Logan began cleaning up the scattered papers, but his hands paused when he lifted one of Mabel's clipped newspaper articles. It was folded open to the same headlines from earlier. "Relief funds missing." He stared at it for a long moment. Whatever she found back then, someone still protecting it. He collected the documents, placed them back in the lockbox, and snapped the lid shut. This time he tucked the box beneath a loose floorboard near his sleeping bag, not its original hiding spot, but somewhere his grandmother's intruder wouldn't expect. Ranger circled twice and lay beside him, though he didn't relax. The dog's eyes remained fixed on the front door. Logan sat on the edge of the couch, rubbing the back of his neck. His breath still felt shallow, but he managed to steady it again. He wasn't leaving. Not after this. Not after Mabel had carried this burden alone. He glanced at Ranger. "We dig deeper now," he murmured. "They should have left us alone." Outside, the wind picked up, rushing across the cabin roof like a warning whispered in the dark. Logan lay down, but his eyes stayed open long after the fire faded, listening for any shift in the night. Ranger didn't sleep at all. Neither did Logan. By the time dawn crept over the ridge, the cabin felt colder than the mountain itself. Pale light pushed through the frosted windows, stretching long shadows across the floor. Logan sat beside the fireplace, feeding it small pieces of split wood, watching the flames catch slowly. Ranger lay near the door, still on guard, eyes fixed on the thin gap beneath the frame as if expecting someone to return. Logan rubbed his hands together, feeling the tightness in his chest from a night without real rest. The break-in hadn't just shaken him, it had awakened something protective, something angry. Someone had violated his grandmother's home, searched through her things, and left a threat on her table. The old instincts, the ones that had once kept him alive overseas, sharpened again. "Come on," he said softly to Ranger. "We've got work to do." The dog rose immediately, giving a small shake that sent dust and cold air swirling. Logan retrieved the lockbox from its temporary hiding place and set it on the kitchen table. The firelight flickered across its rusted metal surface. He opened the lid carefully. Inside, everything rested exactly where he'd placed it. The photographs, the money, the yellowed clippings, the bundle of handwritten notes tied with twine. He untied the twine. The first page was a journal entry, written in strong, firm strokes of ink. October 30th, 1964. "They're blaming me. I knew they would. Benjamin Crow came to the house yesterday. He said the missing funds were my responsibility. He said if I spoke a word of the truth, I'd lose everything. But I cannot stay silent. I will hide what I know. One day someone will need it." Logan read the words twice before setting the page down, exhaling slowly. The tension in his shoulders deepened. His grandmother hadn't just been caught in some misunderstanding. She had been targeted, pressured, threatened, and she had chosen to protect evidence rather than protect herself. Ranger stepped closer, resting his chin on Logan's thigh. The dog's steady warmth grounded him. Another entry read, "November 12th, 1964. Benjamin Crow offered me money. He said if I disappeared quietly, the town would forget. I refused. He called me foolish. But I know what they did. I know whose hands stole from the victims. If the truth dies with me, then the town dies with it." A cold knot formed in Logan's stomach. Edith's warning at the diner echoed in his mind. Some folks built their lives on what happened to your grandmother. He sifted through the remaining pages. Some were journal entries. Others were letters Mabel had written but never sent. One was addressed to Logan's father, though the envelope had never been opened. His hands trembled just slightly when he held that one. He didn't open it. Not yet. Not until he understood the full story. Ranger let out a quiet huff, turning toward the window. His body stiffened again. Logan followed his gaze. Snowflakes drifted lazily outside, but nothing moved beyond the glass. "It's okay," Logan whispered, though he wasn't certain. He returned to the box and lifted a stack of old photos, black and white images of the town from decades ago. Flooded streets, destroyed homes, volunteers working with shovels and buckets. And there, 3 figures standing near a relief station. Mabel Whitaker, Benjamin Crow, a man Logan didn't recognize. Mabel stood strong and straight, her eyes bright even in grayscale. Crow, younger but unmistakable, stood with one foot angled away from the camera, like someone hiding discomfort. Logan set the photos aside. "This wasn't just about money," he said under his breath. "This was about power." He leaned back in the chair, rubbing the back of his neck. A familiar heaviness crept through his chest, tightening the air around him. It was the same sensation that sometimes flickered through him when old memories pressed in. The sound of explosions, the sight of a fallen teammate, the feeling of being responsible for things beyond his control. Ranger nudged him again. Logan took a deep breath and let it out slowly. "Thanks, partner." He returned to the table and opened the final letter in the stack. The handwriting was shakier than the earlier pages, written years later. "If you are reading this, it means the truth survived longer than I expected. I pray you are stronger than I was. I pray you are not afraid. They wanted the money. They took it from the people who needed it most. And when I tried to stop them, they made sure I was alone." Logan swallowed hard. His grandmother hadn't left to save herself. She had left to save the evidence. He glanced toward the dresser where the panel had been hidden for decades. Mabel had worked alone, lived alone, died alone. But she had kept the truth safe long enough for him to find it. He stood and walked to the window. The forest outside felt endless, dark green pines rising against the distant ridge. Somewhere out there, someone had broken into the cabin last night. Someone who still feared what Mabel left behind. "We can't run from this," Logan said quietly. Ranger pressed against his leg in agreement. He turned back to the table, grabbed his coat, and tucked the journal pages into the inner pocket. He scanned the room once more, recognizing the weight of the history within its walls. As they stepped outside, the wind sliced across the clearing. The sky had darkened again, thick snow clouds gathering above the pines. Ranger scanned the tree line, his body angled forward, senses sharp. Logan locked the cabin behind them. "What you did, you didn't do for yourself," he said softly, thinking of Mabel. "And now we finish what you started." Ranger barked once, a low, steady sound, ready for whatever came next. The mountain wasn't silent anymore, and the truth felt closer than ever. By mid-morning, the sky had darkened again, with low gray clouds moving fast over the ridge. Snow drifted in thin sheets across the clearing, and the cold pressed deeper into the cabin walls. Logan zipped his coat and stepped outside with Ranger close at his heel. He needed fresh air, and he needed to clear his mind before deciding what to do next. Ranger trotted ahead, nose lifted toward the wind. The dog paused often, sniffing the ground, then the air, then the snow that had blown in from the direction of the forest. Logan watched him quietly. Ranger wasn't anxious now. He was focused, purposeful, almost as if he already knew what they were looking for. "Lead the way," Logan murmured. Ranger responded instantly, turning toward the back of the cabin, where an old woodshed leaned crookedly under the weight of the winter. The structure looked ready to collapse at the next heavy snowfall. Logan hadn't paid much attention to it before, just another part of a forgotten mountain home. But Ranger had. The dog's pace quickened. His tail lowered into a straight line, and his ears angled sharply forward. Logan's heart beat a little faster. He recognized that posture. It was Ranger's serious find stance, the one he used during search operations overseas. "What do you have?" Logan asked. Ranger circled the shed, nose brushing against the frost-covered ground. Then, without hesitation, he began digging. Not frantic, not panicked, but strong, precise strokes of his paws, the kind that came from years of trained instinct. Snow and dirt scattered behind him. Logan knelt beside him. "Easy, Ranger. Let me help." He brushed away loose soil with gloved hands, clearing a patch beneath the shed. The ground felt firmer than it should, metallic, flat. His fingers traced along a cold, curved edge. "What is this?" Ranger barked once, sharp and deliberate. Logan pushed aside more snow, revealing the outline of a circular steel surface buried beneath the earth. Moss clung to the metal, and old leaves had gathered around its edges. A hatch, a sealed one, hidden deliberately. Logan sat back on his heels, the cold air hitting his lungs in short breaths. Mabel had been hiding something, but he hadn't expected this. A secret panel in the cabin wall was one thing. A concealed underground structure was something else entirely. "How long have you known this was here?" Logan asked softly. Ranger only pressed his nose against the metal again, confirming the find. Logan ran his hand along the hatch. The locking bolts were old but solid, industrial grade, the kind used for storm shelters or supply bunkers. Snow caught in the grooves. He wiped it clean and found a narrow handle recessed into the steel. He pulled. The hatch groaned in protest, the sound echoing across the clearing. Rust flaked off as it slowly lifted, releasing a cold gust of air from below, air untouched for decades. A narrow wooden ladder led down into darkness. Ranger stepped forward, peering down, but didn't descend. He waited for Logan. "Right behind me," Logan said. He clicked his flashlight on and lowered himself slowly, boots finding each rung carefully. The wood creaked beneath his weight, but it held. The air smelled of old paper, metal, and earth, heavy with time. When he reached the bottom, he swept the flashlight across the space. It wasn't large, a single room, maybe 12 feet by 12 feet, but everything inside was arranged with meticulous care. A row of metal shelves lined the back wall. Old ledgers, folders, and bound documents filled them. A stack of audio tapes sat neatly on a wooden crate. Photographs were pinned to a corkboard on the far side. Grainy images of destroyed homes, bulldozed lots, men in suits shaking hands beside construction equipment. And on a table near the center, covered with a sheet of plastic, was a list of names. Logan recognized the handwriting immediately. Mabel Whitaker. He reached for the top ledger and opened it. Names, addresses, property values. Notes about flood victims selling their land for a fraction of its worth. Margins filled with Mabel's careful handwriting. Funds diverted. Forced sale. Crow property acquisition. Logan felt a cold heaviness wash over him. This wasn't a woman hiding money. This was a woman keeping the proof safe. He moved to the corkboard and lifted a photo. It showed Benjamin Crow standing beside several businessmen, all smiling in front of a new development project built over land that once belonged to flood survivors. Logan set the photo down slowly, his jaw tightening. Mabel had gathered everything: documents, recordings, photographs. She had built a case strong enough to topple anyone who tried to silence her. But instead of exposing it, she had chosen to hide it, protect it, preserve it. And now the pieces began to connect. The break-in, the whispers, the truck watching him. Someone knew this bunker existed, or they suspected, and they wanted this evidence destroyed. Ranger barked once from above the hatch, alert, urgent. Logan's pulse quickened. "What is it?" Another bark, sharper. Logan hurried up the ladder, flashlight bouncing off the walls. He pushed open the hatch and climbed into the snow. Ranger stood at the edge of the clearing, staring into the woods, posture rigid, muscles tight. Logan followed the dog's line of sight. Nothing moved. Nothing looked out of place. But Logan felt it. A presence. A watchfulness. Someone had been close enough for Ranger to sense them. He scanned the tree line. The world was silent except for the wind brushing through branches. Whoever had come wasn't here to talk. They were checking the cabin, watching for activity, maybe even waiting for Logan to slip up. He put a steadying hand on Ranger's back. "We found something big," he said quietly. "And that means we're not doing this alone anymore." Ranger's tail flicked once. Affirmation. Logan glanced back at the open hatch. Snow swirled around it, as though the mountain itself were trying to hide the truth again. "Let's get this closed," he murmured. They sealed the hatch tightly and covered the metal with snow and leaves until it blended perfectly with the ground again. Logan stood in the quiet clearing, the cold biting through his jacket. He felt the shift inside him. No longer confusion, no longer sorrow. Determination. This was no longer just about Mabel's past. This was about a town whose wounds had been kept open for decades, and someone willing to hurt others to protect a lie. He looked toward the dark line of trees. "We're in it now, Ranger," he whispered, "all the way." The dog stepped closer, bracing against the cold. The truth was no longer buried, and the mountain wasn't finished with them yet. By late afternoon, the snow had stopped falling, and a pale sun pressed weakly through the thinning clouds. Logan spent the rest of the morning memorizing the contents of Mabel's secret bunker, committing every name, every number, every photograph to mind. Ranger stayed close, pacing and sniffing near the doors and windows as if expecting the intruder from the night before to return. Logan had just finished boarding up the pried-open back window when Ranger stiffened. His entire body went rigid. Ears forward, tail straight, weight shifted to the front paws. A low, deep growl rolled from his chest. "What is it?" Logan whispered. Before Ranger could respond, the crunch of tires on packed snow echoed through the clearing. Logan stepped onto the porch, Ranger at his side, and watched as a dark luxury SUV emerged from the tree line, its black paint gleaming like a shard of obsidian against the white landscape. The vehicle slowed, then stopped just feet from the cabin steps. Two men stepped out. The first was older, dressed in a heavy wool coat and leather gloves, his silver hair combed neatly back. Even from a distance, Logan could see the sharpness in his eyes, the kind of cold calculation he had seen on men in power before. The second man was younger, mid-40s, tall, fit, wearing a tailored suit beneath his overcoat. The older man stepped forward and extended a hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Barrett," he announced. "My name is Benjamin Crow, and this is my son, Troy, our county prosecutor." Crow, the same name that filled Mabel's journals like a shadow. Logan didn't move from the top step. What brings you here? Crow took another step closer, ignoring the tension in Logan's voice. Well, we heard that Mabel's grandson finally came home. News travels quickly in small towns. Ranger's growl deepened, vibrating through the porch boards. Troy Crow eyed the dog uneasily. Quite an animal you've got there, Troy said. Looks dangerous. He's controlled, Logan replied calmly. Can't say the same about strangers walking onto my property. A flicker passed across Benjamin Crow's face. Annoyance, maybe even offense. But it vanished under another constructed smile. We simply wanted to extend our condolences, Crow said. Your grandmother was complicated, but she was family to this town. Funny, Logan said, crossing his arms. From what I've seen, the town didn't treat her that way. Crow's smile wavered. Small communities can be unforgiving. Still, I hope you won't judge us too quickly. There was a strange weight to the way he said it, an edge beneath the politeness. Troy stepped forward next. Dad's right. Folks here can be protective of their history. Some things are best left alone, Mr. Barrett. Digging too deep can stir up the wrong kind of trouble. Ranger barked, sharp and sudden. Troy jolted back. Logan's voice dropped to something colder. If you came here to intimidate me, it's not working. Benjamin held up a placating hand. Nothing of the sort, I assure you. We simply think it might be in your best interest to return to Arizona. Mabel's estate is… well, this old place is more trouble than it's worth. I'll decide that myself. A long silence followed. Snow fell from a branch overhead, hitting the hood of the SUV with a soft thud. The wind brushed through the pines. Ranger took one step forward, positioning himself just slightly in front of Logan. Benjamin Crow's eyes flicked toward the cabin, lingering on the boarded window, the disturbed snow, the sealed hatch hidden beneath layers of debris. You've been busy, he said quietly. Logan didn't answer. Crow cleared his throat. My offer stands. If you ever wish to sell the property, my family would be happy to take it off your hands. At a generous price, we have sentimental ties to this land. Not interested? Troy's expression hardened. This house isn't up to code, Barrett. One inspection and the county could condemn it. Dangerous wiring, structural issues, unsafe location. It's remarkable it stood this long. Logan's jaw tightened. Is that a threat? He asked. Just a fact, Troy said, shrugging. Mountain roads can be deadly too. All it takes is one wrong turn. Ranger barked again, loud and fierce. Benjamin placed a hand on his son's shoulder, guiding him back a step. We meant no offense. Truly. We only hope you'll reconsider staying here. These mountains aren't kind to outsiders. Good thing I'm not an outsider, Logan replied. I'm a Whitaker. Crow's polite mask cracked, just for a second. Then he turned, his coat brushing against the snow-dusted ground. You're making a mistake, Mr. Barrett. Be careful. The two men climbed back into the SUV. The engine roared to life, and the vehicle rolled down the clearing, disappearing into the pines as abruptly as it had arrived. Ranger stood at the edge of the porch, watching until the last sound faded. Logan placed a hand on the dog's back. They know, he murmured. Maybe not everything, but they know enough. Ranger's tail flicked once, alert, ready. Logan stared into the woods where the SUV had vanished. The threat was no longer hidden. It had walked right up to his doorstep. And now, Every step forward would be a step into danger. The next morning arrived colder than any before. A pale layer of ice coated the porch rail, and the sun struggled to push its light through the heavy cloud cover. Logan stood at the window, sipping lukewarm coffee, watching Ranger patrol the perimeter like he had done for years of wars in combat zones. The dog's steps were careful, measured, deliberate, his way of telling Logan that the danger hadn't passed. Logan's mind refused to settle. Every word spoken by Benjamin and Troy Crow echoed in the back of his thoughts. Their visit wasn't a courtesy. They were checking to see how much he knew. That told Logan one thing clearly. They were afraid. He wasn't going to let fear dictate his next move. If he wanted answers, real answers, he needed to talk to someone who had lived through it all, someone who held the missing pieces of the decades-old puzzle. Mabel's journals mentioned him by name. Harold Dunley, former relief committee member, the only one who had ever questioned Crow's decisions. The man was still alive. Barely, but alive. Ranger barked once, calling Logan outside. The dog stood near the truck, tail stiff, nose pointed down the mountain road. "Let's go," Logan said. The drive to the Evergreen Ridge nursing home took them down twisting mountain roads, past frozen streams and clusters of old cabins, some abandoned, some still living under plumes of wood smoke. Ranger stayed alert the entire trip, occasionally glancing behind them through the back window as if expecting the black SUV to return. By the time they pulled into the small parking lot, snow was falling again, slow flakes drifting sideways in the wind. The nursing home sat at the edge of town, an older brick building softened by years of mountain weather. Logan and Ranger stepped inside, greeted by the faint scent of antiseptic and warm blankets. A receptionist looked up with mild surprise at the sight of the large K9, but smiled politely when Ranger sat calmly at Logan's side. "I'm here to speak with Harold Dunley," Logan said. Her expression softened. "He doesn't get many visitors anymore." She checked the sign-in book. "He's still in room 12, down the hall, second door on the right." Logan thanked her and walked toward the room, Ranger's nails clicking softly against the linoleum floor. As they neared the end of the hallway, a strained cough echoed from behind a partially open door. Logan knocked lightly. "Mr. Dunley? My name is Logan Barrett. Mabel Whitaker was my grandmother." Silence. Then a frail voice answered, "Come in." Logan pushed the door open. The room was small but tidy. Harold Dunley lay in a narrow bed, thin and pale, his hair nearly white. His eyes, though weak, sharpened when he saw Logan. Ranger approached slowly, sensing the man's fragility, and sat by the bedside. "You look just like your father," Harold whispered. "He was a good man." Logan swallowed. "I didn't know Mabel well, but I'm starting to understand she carried something heavy. Something that involved you, too." Harold's chest rose and fell shakily. "I've waited a long time for someone in your family to come." He motioned toward a drawer beside the bed. Logan opened it and found a small leather-bound notebook, old but well-kept. "That," Harold said, "was my insurance policy. I knew Crow would silence anyone who talked, so I wrote down everything." Logan opened the notebook carefully. Names, dates, transactions, closed-door conversations, threats. Every page revealed another layer of corruption. "Crow engineered the entire thing," Harold said, voice trembling with fatigue. "The flood destroyed half the town. Relief money poured in. But instead of rebuilding, they diverted it. Set up shell companies. Used it to buy land from desperate survivors." Logan tightened his grip on the notebook. "My grandmother tried to expose them," he said quietly. Harold nodded slowly. She confronted Benjamin in private first. He threatened her, told her if she didn't keep quiet, her family wouldn't be safe. His voice cracked. I should have backed her up, but I was a coward, and she paid for it. It's not too late, Logan said. Harold's eyes glistened. The truth deserves to be heard before I'm gone. He took a shaky breath. There's something else, Harold whispered. Your father. He wasn't supposed to survive. Logan's heart froze. What are you talking about? Harold closed his eyes for a moment, gathering strength. Crow wanted to scare Mabel into silence. He knew she wouldn't give in unless someone she loved was in danger. They planned an accident on the old Ridge Road, but Mabel found out. He opened his eyes again, voice thin and breaking. She fled into the mountains that night, took your father with her, disappeared before they could carry it out. Logan felt something inside him shift, an ache, a tremor. Ranger nudged his hand, sensing the storm behind his eyes. His grandmother hadn't just protected evidence. She had protected their entire family. Logan closed the notebook slowly. Thank you, Mr. Dunley. Harold managed a weak smile. Bring the truth to light, son. For her, for the town. And don't let Crow scare you. Fear is how he's gotten away with it all these years. Logan stood, Ranger rising with him. If there's anything you need, Logan said gently, I'll be here. Harold nodded, exhausted but relieved. Just tell them what happened. Ranger walked forward and placed his head gently against Harold's arm, an unexpected gesture of comfort. The old man's eyes softened, and he whispered, Good boy. As Logan and Ranger stepped out into the hallway, the wind howled against the windows, rattling the frames. The town's wounds were older and deeper than Logan had realized, and now he carried the final missing piece. He tucked the notebook safely inside his coat. The truth would not stay buried anymore, not if he had anything to say about it. By the time Logan left the nursing home, the clouds had thickened again, gathering low over Evergreen Ridge like a ceiling ready to collapse. Snow drifted sideways in the wind as he and Ranger made their way back through town. People watched him from behind frosted windows, some curious, some nervous, some guilty. Logan felt the weight of Harold Dunley's notebook inside his coat. The old man's trembling voice echoed with every step he took. Your grandmother wasn't supposed to survive. They wanted to silence her. The truth had lived in shadow for 60 years. Now it was time to give it a voice. Ranger walked close, brushing against Logan's leg now and then, keeping him steady. As they reached the old town square, Logan noticed more cars than usual parked along the snowy street. People clustered near the community center, dressed in heavy coats, hats pulled low against the cold. A banner hung over the entrance. Memorial service, 60 years since the mudslide. Logan stopped. So did Ranger. Benjamin Crow would be there. Troy Crow, too. The same men who had come to intimidate him at the cabin. Ranger's ears tilted forward. The dog sensed Logan's shift in breathing, steady but sharpening. This is it, Logan murmured. Time to end it. They climbed the steps toward the building. Inside, the room was full. Town officials, elderly residents, young families, people who had inherited their parents' memories of that disaster long before they were born. A podium stood at the front of the room. Benjamin Crow stepped up to it, supported by his son. People quieted. Some nodded respectfully. Others avoided his eyes. Crow cleared his throat, adjusting his coat. "Thank you all for coming," he began. His voice carried easily across the room, smooth, practiced, full of years of influence. "We gather today to honor the lives lost in the mudslide of '64, a terrible tragedy that reshaped our community. But we survived it together. We rebuilt together. And our strength..." Logan stepped through the doorway. Every head turned. Ranger stood beside him, tail stiff, silent, but alert. The dog's presence alone commanded attention. Logan walked forward, slow, steady, controlled. Crow's words faltered. His polished confidence cracked when their eyes met. Logan stopped at the front row. "I'd like to add something to the historical record." Gasps rippled through the room. Troy Crow stepped forward. "This is a private memorial. The truth doesn't need an invitation," Logan said firmly. Someone whispered, "That's Mabel Whitaker's grandson." Benjamin forced a thin smile. "Mr. Barrett, this really isn't the..." "It is exactly the time," Logan said, drawing Harold's notebook from his coat. "Your version of history has stood for 60 years. Mine is about 5 days old. But it's the truth my grandmother carried until her death." He placed the notebook on the podium next to Crow's shaking hand. "Here are notes," Logan continued, "taken by a committee member who was too afraid to speak until now. Notes detailing how relief money was diverted into shell companies, controlled by Benjamin Crow and his associates." Murmurs rose. Logan opened the notebook to marked pages, reading snippets aloud. Dates, amounts, names, signatures. People leaned forward, stunned. Others shook their heads, unable to believe how deeply the truth had been buried. Crow's face drained of color. "That's not... Those are lies," he stammered. "Fabrications." Logan didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "My grandmother confronted you privately. You threatened her. She refused your bribe. She fled to the mountains to protect the evidence you wanted destroyed." He reached into his coat again, pulling out copies of the ledgers from the bunker. Ranger remained at his side, still as stone, eyes fixed on Crow. "These are Mabel's records," Logan said. "The same ones your men searched my cabin for. The same ones hidden in a bunker for decades, because she knew this day might come." Logan placed the documents beside the notebook. "And here," he said quietly, "are her audio tapes." A hush fell so deep it seemed even the wind outside stopped. Logan pressed play on the small recorder he'd brought. Benjamin Crow's voice crackled through the speakers, 40 years younger but unmistakable. "Keep your mouth shut, Mabel. If you talk, your family won't be safe. Walk away. Forget what you saw." Gasps filled the room. Someone dropped their coffee cup. An elderly woman pressed a hand to her mouth. Crow staggered back, gripping the podium as though the floor had tilted under him. Troy turned pale. "Dad?" Logan looked across the room. Faces shifted, from confusion to shock to anger. Long whispered suspicions snapped into focus. A lie sustained for decades began to crumble. Harold Dunley, pushed in by a nurse, wheeled himself to the front row. His voice, frail but determined, rose above the chaos. "I was there. I heard it all. I wrote it down because I knew someday the truth would need a witness." Crow's knees buckled. "This is slander," he hissed. "You have no proof she didn't steal." "Yes, we do," Logan said. He lifted a final sheet, Mabel's ledger entry, written in her hand. "Funds preserved for lawful distribution. Will not allow theft disguised as disaster relief." A murmur swept through the crowd like a shifting wind. Then, unexpectedly, Edith Collins stood. then another older resident, then another. Mabel was a good woman. She helped my family anonymously. She sent money when our home flooded in '72. She never asked for anything. Crow stared at the floor, defeated. Logan closed the ledger gently. My grandmother lived half her life in exile so this town could believe a lie, he said quietly. She kept your secrets to protect the innocent, and she died without seeing any justice. He looked at the room, at the faces filled with grief, anger, relief, and awakening. But that ends today. Silence held for a long, long moment. Then applause began, soft at first, then louder, echoing through the hall. Not celebration, liberation. Crow swayed, suddenly frail. Troy stepped forward, jaw clenched. We need to leave. Benjamin Crow, once the most powerful man in the county, shuffled out of the room under the eyes of the very people he had deceived. Logan placed a hand on Ranger's head. The truth had finally found its voice. And Evergreen Ridge would never be the same. In the days following the memorial confrontation, the mountain town stirred with a kind of awakening Logan had never expected to witness. For the first time in 60 years, people spoke openly about Mabel Whitaker, not as the town thief, not as the hermit who disappeared, but as a woman who carried a burden too heavy for anyone to bear alone. Snow fell gently across Evergreen Ridge as state investigators arrived, combing through documents, interviewing residents, and reviewing evidence Logan had presented. News trucks lined the main street. Headlines flickered across regional broadcasts. Local hero clears family name after 6 decades. County scandal resurfaces. Whitaker legacy restored. Through it all, Logan kept mostly to himself. He and Ranger spent their days walking the edge of the forest or organizing Mabel's papers inside the cabin. It felt strange, comforting even, to no longer feel the cabin's walls pressing inward with secrets. The air inside felt lighter now, touched by truth instead of silence. One morning, while Logan chopped firewood, Ranger alerted with a soft bark. A man approached through the trees, a young man, probably mid-30s, wearing a thick winter coat and holding a folder under one arm. He looked nothing like his father or grandfather. His steps were hesitant, respectful. "Mr. Barrett?" he called out. Logan lowered the axe. Ranger stood at his side, calm but alert. "Can I help you?" The man stopped at a safe distance. "My name is David Crow." He glanced down, ashamed. "I'm Benjamin's grandson." Logan studied him. No arrogance, no polished mask. Just an earnestness weighed down by a family story too heavy for his shoulders. "What brings you here?" Logan asked. David held out the folder. I'm sorry for what my family did. Not just to your grandmother, but to this whole town." His breath clouded in the cold air. "I've been helping the investigators, and I wanted to give you this." Inside the folder were copies of county land records, confirming everything Mabel had written, and something more. A handwritten note. "My grandfather passed away last night," David said quietly. "Before he did, he asked me to deliver that note to you." Logan opened it carefully. The shaky handwriting was unmistakable. She was right. I was wrong. May God forgive me. Logan stood still for a moment, the wind whispering through the pines around them. Ranger pressed against his leg, sensing the heaviness in the air. David swallowed. "I know that doesn't fix anything, but I hope it brings some peace." "It does," Logan said softly. "Thank you." David nodded once and then walked back through the trees, leaving Logan alone with the note, the closest thing to an apology his grandmother had ever received. Spring came slowly to the mountains. Snow melted off the cabin roof, dripping into small streams that wound through the clearing. The air softened, carrying the scent of pine and thawing earth. By then, Logan had made a decision. He wasn't leaving Evergreen Ridge. He stood on the porch one bright morning, watching as a group of volunteers unloaded lumber, paint cans, and donated furniture from trucks. Children ran through the clearing, their laughter echoing off the cliff behind the house. Ranger trotted among them, tail wagging, accepting every pat and scratch like a gentle guardian. "Looks like you've got quite the turnout," Edith Collins said as she approached with a thermos of hot chocolate. Logan smiled. "Couldn't have done it without you." She handed him a cup. "You're building something good here, something this town needs." The cabin had transformed. What was once a place of exile was being reborn into the Whitaker Resilience Center, a community space for veterans, disaster survivors, and local families. The living room became a reading nook for children. The loft upstairs was turned into a small counseling room. The kitchen would soon host support meetings and community meals. It felt right. It felt like healing. Later, Logan hung the final frame on the mantel, a photograph of Mabel holding his father as a young boy, taken decades before everything went wrong. Beside it, he placed a picture of himself and Ranger taken at the center's opening ceremony, a symbol of the past meeting the present. Ranger settled at Logan's feet, letting out a satisfied sigh. "You did good, girl," Logan murmured, scratching behind her ear. "Couldn't have done any of this without you." Ranger nuzzled his hand, eyes warm and steady. As evening draped itself over the ridge, Logan stepped outside one last time. The setting sun painted the mountains in gold and rose, casting long shadows across the valley. Children's artwork fluttered in the cabin windows. Voices drifted from inside, gentle, hopeful, alive. The world felt whole for the first time in a long time. Logan rested his hand on the porch railing, breathing in the quiet. "You finished what I started." The words weren't spoken aloud. They didn't need to be. They lived in the wind that rustled through the pines, in the soft creak of the cabin's old boards, in the peace that settled over the clearing like a blessing. Ranger sat beside him, her head pressed against his knee. Logan looked out over the land his grandmother had protected at such great cost. "We're home, Ranger," he whispered. And the mountain, silent and eternal, finally felt like home indeed. If you believe the truth should always come to light, drop a 1 in the comments. And if you've ever stood your ground for what's right, type yes, so we know you're with us. Stay with this channel for more stories of justice, heart, and the fight to protect what matters. Don't forget to subscribe.